Chapter 7. The corridors of the cave were much more extensive and complex than they could have imagined. They slowly moved forward, illuminating their path with torches that seemed to have been installed centuries ago. The walls of the corridors were covered with the same glowing runes they had seen at the entrance, creating the impression that this place held ancient secrets. "These runes look like they've always been here," Tom remarked, passing by one of the walls, "as if this cave had its own life long before we came." "Maybe this place is some kind of sanctuary," Julia suggested, holding the puppy in her arms. "Maybe it holds the answers to everything that's happening." The corridors stretched further, each turn seeming endless. They moved cautiously, trying not to get lost in the labyrinth. The puppy, snuggling against Julia, occasionally lifted its head, its eyes glowing in the dark, as if sensing something hidden from their eyes. After a long walk, they found themselves in front of a vast hall that suddenly opened before them. This hall was completely different from everything they had seen before. The walls of the cave were covered with crystals that emitted a soft, muted light, coloring the space in enchanting shades. In the center of the hall stood a mysterious altar. It was made of black marble, its surface gleaming in the light of the crystals. The altar was decorated with carved symbols and runes that seemed alive, shimmering and glistening. Above it hung a mysterious glow, giving the entire structure a magical aura. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. "I've never seen anything like it." Tom stepped closer, examining the altar. "Something about this place makes me feel uneasy, as if it holds something more than we can imagine." Julia noticed the puppy, which suddenly became restless. It started whining and reaching for one of the walls. Julia followed its gaze and saw a glowing inscription in an unknown language carved into the stone. "Look," she said, pointing at the inscription. The puppy found something. They approached and began studying the inscription. The symbols were unfamiliar but seemed incredibly important. Julia squinted, trying to decipher their meaning. "It looks like a riddle," she said. "Maybe if we can solve it, we'll find the answers we're looking for." They began discussing possible meanings of the inscription, considering various options. Tom suggested it might be a cipher that needed decoding. Sarah speculated it could be an ancient language that needed translating. "Let's try something simple," Julia suggested. "Maybe it's related to the altar. What if we try to match the symbols with the runes on the altar?" They began carefully examining the symbols on the altar, trying to find matches with the inscription on the wall. The process was long and exhausting, but gradually they started to understand that the symbols indeed corresponded with each other. "We're on the right track," Tom said, his voice trembling with excitement. "A little more, and we can solve this riddle." Finally, after much effort, they realized that the symbols on the altar and the inscription on the wall formed a code that needed to be spoken aloud. Julia took a deep breath and began reciting the words they had deciphered. As soon as the last words left her lips, something incredible happened. The walls with the inscription began to slowly open, revealing a hidden passage leading deeper into the cave. The light from the passage illuminated their faces, and they felt they were standing on the brink of new discoveries. "We did it," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with wonder and joy. "This is just the beginning," Tom said, looking into the depth of the new passage. "Greater mysteries await us ahead." Julia, holding the puppy, nodded and, gathering her courage, took the first step into the new passage. Ahead, new trials and answers to the mysteries they sought awaited them. The chapter ended on this note, leaving the heroes on the threshold of a new adventure. The passage led them deeper into the heart of the cave, and the walls became increasingly ornate, covered with strange and intricate patterns. The light from the crystals embedded in the walls cast shadows, giving the surroundings a sinister hue. The air grew colder with each step, and every sound echoed, filling the cave with ominous noises. The puppy, who had been full of energy before, now walked more quietly, clearly sensing something. Julia held him close, trying to comfort him, but couldn't shake off the growing sense of dread. Tom and Sarah followed behind, their faces tense, each sound making them flinch. "Do you feel it?" Tom whispered, breaking the silence. "The air is getting colder." Yes, Sarah replied, rubbing her arms for warmth. But we must keep going. There might be answers ahead. The path became steeper, and they carefully navigated the uneven ground, using the walls for support. After some time, they emerged into a wide open chamber. The chamber was enormous, with a high ceiling lost in darkness. The walls were covered with ancient frescoes depicting scenes of rituals and sacrifices. In the center stood a large stone table, its surface stained with what looked like old blood. Several tall statues surrounded the table, their expressions stern and authoritative. It looks like some kind of sacrificial altar, Tom muttered, his voice echoing through the chamber. Julia approached the table, her eyes scanning the ancient symbols carved into its surface. These symbols, they look like the ones we saw earlier. Maybe they hold more clues. The puppy jumped out of Julia's arms and began sniffing around the chamber, his little nose twitching as he explored. Suddenly, he stopped in front of one of the statues and barked, his eyes fixed on a specific spot. What has he found? Sarah wondered aloud. They approached the statue and noticed a hidden compartment at its base. Tom opened it, revealing a small, intricately carved box. He carefully opened it to find a collection of ancient scrolls and a strange, glowing amulet. These scrolls might tell us more about this place, Julia said, taking one and unrolling it. But this amulet, it seems powerful. As she held the amulet, warmth spread through her body, and she felt a strange connection to the chamber. The frescoes on the walls came to life, and scenes unfolded before her eyes. She saw figures in robes conducting rituals and chanting in an unknown language. Julia, are you all right? Tom asked, noticing her distant expression. Yes, she replied, shaking off the vision. I think this amulet is the key to unlocking more secrets of this place. They took the scrolls and the amulet, continuing their exploration. The puppy led them, his heightened senses guiding them through another passage branching off from the chamber. This passage was narrower and more winding, the walls closer together and the air heavier. After some time, they emerged into a smaller chamber filled with ancient artifacts. Shelves lined the walls, filled with various items from different eras. In the center stood a pedestal with a large, open book, its pages filled with indecipherable text. This must be some kind of archive, Sarah suggested. Maybe we can find more information here. They carefully examined the artifacts, finding items hinting at different cultures and time periods. Some were clearly from ancient civilizations, while others looked more modern, as if the chamber had been used for centuries. Look at this, Tom said, holding a small, intricately carved figurine. It's an image of some deity. Maybe this place was a sanctuary for various groups throughout the ages, Julia proposed. A place where they could conduct their rituals and store their knowledge. The puppy barked again, drawing their attention to another hidden compartment. Inside, they found a map, its edges worn and the ink faded but still legible. The map depicted the cave system, marking various chambers and passages. This could help us find our way through this labyrinth, Tom said, tracing the lines with his finger. It looks like there's another large chamber ahead. Using the map as a guide, they slowly navigated the winding passages, the air growing colder and heavier. Finally, they reached a vast, circular chamber with a high domed ceiling. In the center stood a massive statue of a figure with outstretched arms, as if welcoming them. This must be the heart of the cave, Julia said, her voice echoing through the vast space. The place where everything converges. As they approached the statue, they noticed a series of glowing runes on the floor, forming a circle around it. The amulet in Julia's hand began to pulse with warm light, resonating with the runes. I think we need to place the amulet here, she said, stepping into the circle. She placed the amulet on the ground, and the runes immediately lit up, their light growing brighter. The eyes of the statue began to glow, and a deep, resonant voice filled the chamber. Who dares to enter this sacred place? The voice boomed, sending chills down their spines. We seek answers, Julia replied, her voice steady despite the fear. We want to learn the secrets of this place, and how to stop the darkness that pursues us. The voice was silent for a moment, then spoke again. To gain the knowledge you seek, you must prove your worth. Pass the trials and overcome them. and the truth will be revealed. The ground beneath them trembled, and the chamber began to transform. The walls shifted, revealing a series of doors leading to different parts of the cave. Each door bore a carved symbol representing different elements and trials. "We need to choose a door," Tom said, his voice full of determination. "But which one?" The puppy whimpered, his eyes fixed on one of the doors. It bore the symbol of fire, glowing with an inner light. "Maybe the puppy is guiding us," Sarah suggested. "Let's trust him." They approached the door, feeling the heat emanating from it. Julia opened it, revealing a long corridor filled with flickering flames. The heat was unbearable, but they steeled their resolve and stepped inside. The corridor was a test of endurance and willpower. Flames licked at their heels, and the air was thick with smoke. They had to move quickly and carefully, avoiding the bursts of fire that threatened to consume them. "Stay together," Tom commanded, leading the way. "We have to get through this." They pressed on, their determination unwavering. The flames grew hotter and more intense, but they managed to make it through the corridor unscathed. At the end, they emerged into another chamber filled with water. "This must be the next trial," Julia said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "We need to cross the water." The water was dark and murky, its depth unknown. Faint lights flickered beneath the surface, hinting at hidden dangers. "We'll have to swim," Tom said, steeling himself. "Stay close and keep an eye out." They plunged into the water, its coldness piercing their bones. Swimming was arduous, the currents sapping their strength, and strange creatures occasionally flickered below the surface, casting shadows on their path. Julia kept the puppy above water, fighting the cold that seeped deeper under her skin. "Don't stop," Tom yelled, swimming harder. "We're almost there." They finally reached the other side of the chamber, where the water was shallow. They crawled onto the shore, breathing heavily, their bodies shivering from the cold and exhaustion. Ahead lay another corridor, but this time the walls were adorned with symbols of air, softly glowing in the dark. "It seems like this is the next stage," Tom said, trying to warm up. "We need to keep going." The puppy jumped forward, leading them through the narrow passageway that ascended. The wind grew stronger, making it hard to breathe, but they kept moving, their resolve unwavering. The corridor led them to a wide chamber with a high ceiling. In the center stood a statue with wings, its eyes glowing, creating the impression that it was watching their every move. Around the statue swirled air currents, forming invisible barriers. "This must be the air trial," Julia guessed. "We need to find a way through these currents." They carefully examined the statue and noticed several levers around its base. Each one was adorned with various symbols, reminiscent of the elements they had already faced. "Let's try these levers," Tom suggested. "Maybe they will disable the barriers." They began pulling the levers one by one, and with each movement, the air currents shifted. Some levers intensified the wind, while others weakened it. Finally, they found the right combination, and the currents weakened enough for them to pass. "Great, we did it," Sarah said, crossing the barrier. "But what now?" In the center of the chamber, they found another altar, on which lay an ancient book. Julia carefully opened it, and the pages began to turn on their own, stopping at a particular page. The symbols on it glowed, and a holographic map began to form before their eyes. "This must be the key to the next trial," Julia said, studying the map. "It looks like we need to find a way through a labyrinth." They carefully studied the map and realized that the next passage led to a series of winding tunnels that formed a complex labyrinth. After passing through the air chamber, they found the entrance to the labyrinth and began their journey, relying on the map and their intuition. The labyrinth was full of traps and unexpected turns. The walls were covered with images that came to life as they approached, creating illusions and disorienting them. The puppy seemed to sense the correct path, leading them through the most challenging sections. "This place feels alive," Tom said, as they navigated a narrow passage. "It's as if it wants us to get lost." "We have to trust the puppy," Julia replied. "He's guiding us the right way." After what felt like hours of wandering, they finally reached the labyrinth's exit, which led into the final chamber. It was enormous and illuminated by a soft glow from the walls covered with glowing crystals. In the center stood a majestic altar, surrounded by symbols representing all the elements. "This must be the final trial," Sarah said, examining the altar. "But what do we need to do?" The amulet in Julia's hand began to pulse with a warm light, resonating with the crystals. She realized the amulet was the key to everything. "We need to place the amulet on the altar," she said. "That should complete our trials." Carefully placing the amulet on the altar, they felt the air around them begin to vibrate. The symbols on the walls started to glow brighter, and a projection of a figure in a robe appeared in the center of the altar. "You have proven your worth," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, echoing in their minds. "You have passed all the trials and demonstrated your resolve. Now the truth will be revealed to you." The walls began to move, revealing hidden passages. The projection continued to speak, explaining that this place was an ancient temple, safeguarding knowledge about the world and magic. "This knowledge has been hidden for centuries to protect it from those who would misuse it," the figure said. "Now that you have shown your pure intentions, you may use this knowledge to protect and restore balance." The light around them started to fade, and the figure disappeared, leaving them alone with the newly revealed passages. Julia, Tom, and Sarah stood, realizing that their journey had brought them to the very heart of an ancient mystery. "We must use this knowledge wisely," Julia said, gathering the amulet and scrolls. "We have much work ahead of us." The puppy barked, drawing their attention to one of the passages where a faint light flickered. They understood that this was the path to new discoveries and adventures. With determination in their hearts, they began their journey through the newly opened corridors, knowing that many more trials awaited them. But now they were armed with the knowledge and power they had gained in this ancient temple. Chapter 8. After the walls of the cave parted and revealed a new path, Julia, Tom, and Sarah resolutely moved forward. Their adventures were becoming increasingly intricate, and they felt the growing weight of responsibility for their actions. Nevertheless, each step brought new discoveries and surprises. The path ahead led through a long tunnel illuminated by glowing crystals that shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow. These crystals seemed to have a life of their own, glowing brighter as they passed by. "These crystals seem to be breathing," Sarah remarked, touching one of them. "I wonder where their light comes from." "Maybe it's magic," Tom speculated, carefully examining the tunnel. "This world is full of wonders, and it seems we're just beginning to understand its secrets." Julia led the way, holding the puppy in her arms. The puppy, their faithful companion, clearly sensed something unusual. His ears were alert, and his eyes sparkled with curiosity. Suddenly, an enormous cave appeared ahead, its walls adorned with intricate patterns resembling ancient runes. In the center of the cave stood a large stone circle, around which strange energy pulsed. "It seems we've found another place of power," Tom said, approaching the stone circle. "I wonder what this place is." As they got closer, the stone circle began to glow, and a ghostly figure rose from its center. The figure was dressed in ancient garments, and its eyes gleamed with the wisdom of ages. "You have come to a sacred place," the figure intoned, its voice echoing through the cave. "Here, new truths and abilities will be revealed, but only to those ready to accept them." Julia felt the puppy in her arms begin to vibrate, and suddenly she realized that the light from the stone circle was starting to surround her. She felt a warmth spread through her body, and she suddenly understood that this place was awakening something new in her. The figure continued speaking, "Each of you possesses unique abilities that can only be unlocked in sacred places. You, Julia, are connected to nature and animals. Your bond with this puppy awakens within you the ability to heal and control the energies of nature." Julia felt warmth spreading through her hands and heart. She looked at the puppy and suddenly realized she could communicate with him on a different level. The puppy purred quietly, as if confirming this. "Tom," the figure addressed him, "your power lies in your mind and will. You can control magical energies, create and destroy barriers. Your task is to protect your friends and guide them." Tom felt energy swirling around his hands. He raised his hand, and lines of light began to dance around his fingers, forming a protective barrier. Sarah, the figure, turned to her, Your strength lies in intuition and vision. You can see the future and find paths where others see only walls. Use this gift wisely. Sarah closed her eyes and felt images and visions entering her consciousness. She saw possible paths and choices that could lead to success or failure. The figures slowly dissolved, leaving them in deep contemplation. They stood in the cave, realizing that they now possessed new powers and responsibilities. "Now we understand more," Julia said, looking at her friends. "But this is only the beginning of our journey. We must learn to use our new abilities and continue seeking answers." Suddenly, they heard the sound of dripping water coming from deeper within the cave. They headed in that direction and discovered an underground lake, reflecting the glowing crystals on the cave ceiling. The water was clear and transparent, with strange glowing creatures swimming in its depths. "This is incredible," Sarah exclaimed, looking at the lake. "It seems this place is filled with magic." They decided to rest by the lake to contemplate everything that had happened. Tom, Julia, and Sarah sat on rocks by the water and began discussing their new abilities and plans for the future. "We need to find a way out of here and continue our journey," Tom said, thoughtfully gazing at the lake. "But first, we need to understand how to work with our new powers." "Agreed," Julia nodded. "We must train and study our abilities. Perhaps they will help us deal with those who hunt us." "I feel our journey is becoming more dangerous," Sarah said, looking around. "But we have a chance for success if we act together." They spent several hours by the lake, discussing their abilities and strategies. Julia tried to communicate with the puppy, and soon he began to obey her commands and perform simple tricks. Tom experimented with his magical barriers, creating protective domes and energy walls. Sarah trained her intuition, trying to foresee possible threats and ways to avoid them. Time flew by unnoticed, and soon they realized it was time to move on. The power they had gained gave them hope for success, but they knew there were still many trials ahead. As they began to pack up, Julia suddenly felt Tom's warm hand on her shoulder. She turned around and saw him looking at her with tenderness and care. "Julia," he began, "I know we face many dangers, but I want you to know, I will always be by your side. Together we can overcome any difficulties." Julia felt her heart beat faster. For the first time in a long time, she felt warmth and confidence, knowing she had a reliable friend and partner. "Thank you, Tom," she replied quietly, smiling. "I will be by your side too, despite all the difficulties." Their gazes met, and in that moment they understood that there was something more between them than just friendship. This feeling gave them strength and confidence that they could overcome any trials. They continued their journey, following the map and Sarah's intuition. The tunnels became narrower and more winding, but their new powers helped them overcome obstacles. Julia used her connection with nature to find hidden passages and detours. Tom protected them from magical traps, and Sarah foresaw potential dangers and warned her friends. As they progressed, they began to notice strange symbols on the walls, similar to those they had seen earlier. These symbols emitted a faint glow and seemed alive, reacting to their presence. "What are these signs?" Julia asked, closely examining one of the symbols. "They look like runes but more complex." "These could be ancient magical symbols," Tom suggested. "Maybe they are guiding us or warning us about something." Sarah touched one of the symbols, and it glowed brighter. She closed her eyes and felt a stream of information entering her consciousness. She had a vision of ancient priests creating these symbols to protect the treasures and knowledge of the cave. "These symbols are part of ancient magic," she said, opening her eyes. "They guard important secrets. We must be careful and follow them." As they continued, they noticed the symbols forming patterns pointing in specific directions. Following these indications, they found themselves in a new, enormous cave, its walls covered with ancient frescoes and reliefs. In the center of the cave stood a tall altar around which magical energy swirled. "This place seems even more important," Tom said, examining the cave. "Here, probably the most valuable secrets are kept." They approached the altar and noticed that its surface was covered with ancient runes and symbols. In the center of the altar lay a crystal emitting a soft bluish glow. What could this be? Julia wondered, carefully reaching for the crystal. "Be careful," Tom warned. "We don't know what power it contains." At that moment, the puppy, who had been quietly sitting by Julia's feet, suddenly barked and ran to the altar. He began digging at the base of the altar, and suddenly the surface around him began to glow. "It seems our little friend has found something," Sarah remarked with a smile. They bent closer and saw that a cache was hidden under the altar. Inside, they found an ancient scroll and a small amulet emitting the same magical energy as the crystal. "These artifacts might be the key to the riddle," Tom said, carefully taking the scroll. "Let's see what it says." He unrolled the scroll and began reading. "Whoever finds this scroll should know here lies the knowledge and power needed to fight the darkness. The amulet you hold is the key to awakening your true powers. Use it wisely and remember only unity and purity of heart will lead you to victory." Julia took the amulet and felt a warm wave of energy spread through her body. She realized that the amulet enhanced her abilities and allowed her to control the forces of nature with even greater power. "This is incredible," she said, feeling a new strength within her. "We can use this to find our friends and defeat the darkness." Tom and Sarah also felt their abilities strengthen. They realized that the found artifacts gave them the ability to use their powers more effectively. "We need to move on," Tom said, putting the scroll in his backpack. "We have to find a way out of the cave and continue our journey." They headed towards the cave's exit, following the glowing symbols on the walls. The path became increasingly winding and difficult, but their new powers helped them overcome all obstacles. At some point, they heard a strange noise coming from deep within the cave. It was a sound reminiscent of the echo of voices coming from somewhere far away. What could that be, Sarah wondered, stopping and listening. "Maybe it's another trial," Tom suggested. "We must be ready for anything." They continued walking until they came to a massive double door adorned with intricate reliefs. The doors depicted scenes of battles and magical rituals, and in the center of each door, a symbol glowed resembling the runes they had seen earlier. "These doors look like the entrance to some important place," Julia said, feeling the surface of the door. "I wonder what's on the other side." "We'll only find out one way," Tom said, putting his effort into opening the door. The doors slowly swung open, and they entered a new cave that was even more magnificent than the previous ones. The walls here were adorned with gold and silver inlays, and the ceiling seemed to be studded with stars. In the center of the cave stood a huge magical circle, inside of which pulsed visible energy. This was a place where magic was concentrated to such an extent that the air around seemed charged. "This must be the heart of the cave," Tom said, awestruck by the grandeur of the place. "Incredible power is concentrated here." Suddenly, the puppy barked again and ran to the center of the magic circle. He started digging at the edges of the circle, and soon ancient inscriptions covered in glowing dust appeared. "What have you found this time?" little one Julia asked, approaching and bending down to read the inscriptions. Tom and Sarah joined her, and together they began deciphering the ancient texts. They read, "Only true unity and love can awaken the power hidden in this place. Hearts full of purity and loyalty will open the path to light and banish darkness." "It seems this place is not just about power but about our connection," Sarah said thoughtfully, looking at the inscriptions. "We must be united to move forward." "Let's try," Julia suggested. "We're here together, and our strength is in our friendship and belief in each other." They stood in the circle, holding hands, and felt their powers begin to merge into one. At that moment, the light around them shone even brighter, and they felt the energy of the cave start resonating with their hearts. "We must concentrate on our goal," Tom said, closing his eyes and focusing. "We must think about our friends and what we want to achieve." Julia and Sarah followed his example, and soon they felt the magic circle start glowing even brighter. Suddenly, a pillar of light rose from the center of the circle, and a figure in ancient garments appeared before them. "You have proven your loyalty and unity," the spirit said, its voice echoing through the cave. "Now you possess the power needed to defeat the darkness." The figure slowly dissolved, and the magic circle began to fade, leaving them in the dark. But they knew they now had the strength and knowledge to face any challenge. "We are ready," Julia said, smiling at her friends. "We can defeat the darkness and bring our friends back." They continued their journey through the cave, following the glowing symbols. Each room and tunnel they passed brought them closer to their goal, and they felt their strength growing with every step. Along the way, they encountered many trials, magical traps, hidden passages, and ancient guardians protecting the cave's treasures. But their unity and new powers helped them overcome all obstacles. At some point, they found themselves in front of the final door, adorned with symbols of all the elements: fire, water, earth, and air. This door led to the exit from the cave and to the final challenge awaiting them. "We are ready," Tom said, placing his hand on the door. "Let's finish our journey and bring back peace and light." They opened the door and entered the last chamber, where the final trial awaited them. Chapter 34, The Final Trial. The chamber was vast and circular, with a high domed ceiling that reflected the light from the magical symbols carved into the walls. In the center stood an enormous, ancient altar surrounded by swirling energies of various colors. The air was thick with magic, and a sense of foreboding filled the room. "This is it," Julia whispered, feeling the weight of the moment. The final trial. As they approached the altar, the ground beneath them began to tremble. From the shadows, dark figures emerged, twisted, ethereal forms that radiated malice and darkness. They were the manifestations of the very evil they had been fighting against. "Stay close," Tom warned, his hands glowing with protective magic. "We'll face this together." The dark figures lunged at them, and a fierce battle ensued. Tom conjured barriers and shields, deflecting the attacks. Julia summoned the power of nature, vines and roots sprouting from the ground to entangle the enemies. Sarah used her foresight to anticipate the moves of the dark figures, guiding her friends through the chaos. Despite their newfound powers, the battle was intense. The dark figures were relentless, their attacks growing stronger with each passing moment. But the trio's unity and determination proved to be their greatest strength. They fought as one, each using their abilities to complement the others. At the height of the battle, the altar began to glow brighter, and the swirling energies intensified. The dark figures, sensing their impending defeat, made one last desperate assault. But Tom, Julia, and Sarah stood firm, their combined powers forming a radiant shield that repelled the darkness. With a final surge of energy, the dark figures disintegrated, their essence absorbed by the altar. The room fell silent, and the air felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. "We did it," Sarah said, breathing heavily. "The darkness is gone." But their victory was not without cost. Tom, exhausted from the battle, fell to his knees. Julia and Sarah rushed to his side, helping him up. "Are you okay?" Julia asked, concern in her eyes. "I'm fine," Tom assured her, though his voice was weak, just tired. As they stood together, the altar began to change. The swirling energies coalesced into a single, bright light that hovered above the altar. The light then transformed into a crystalline key, hovering in midair. "This must be the key to the final door," Sarah said, reaching out to take it. As soon as she touched the key, a door appeared in the wall opposite the entrance. The door was adorned with the same symbols they had seen throughout their journey, glowing softly in the dim light. "Let's finish this," Tom said, finding his strength. They approached the door, and Sarah inserted the key into the lock. The door swung open, revealing a long corridor that led to the outside world. Sunlight streamed in, a welcome sight after the darkness of the cave. As they stepped through the door, they felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. They had faced incredible challenges and had emerged stronger and more united than ever. Outside, they found themselves in a lush forest, the sunlight filtering through the leaves. The air was fresh and filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. It was a stark contrast to the dark, oppressive atmosphere of the cave. "We made it," Julia said, smiling. "We're finally out." But their journey was far from over. They still had to find their missing friends and put an end to the darkness that threatened their world. As they stood in the sunlight, they felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. "Let's keep moving," Tom said, looking ahead. We have a lot of work to do." They set off through the forest, their spirits high. The puppy, now a trusted companion, trotted alongside them, its eyes bright with curiosity. They knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As they walked, they talked about their next steps. They needed to find the source of the darkness and put an end to it once and for all. They also needed to find their missing friends and bring them back safely. "We have the power to do this," Julia said, feeling the amulet's warmth against her chest. "We just need to stay united and believe in ourselves." "And in each other," Tom added, smiling at her. "We've come this far together, and we'll finish this together." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Let's find our friends and end this darkness. For good." Their journey continued, each step bringing them closer to their goal. They knew they would face more challenges and dangers, but they were ready. Together they were unstoppable. As they ventured deeper into the forest, they felt a sense of anticipation and excitement. The world was full of mysteries and wonders, and they were ready to uncover them all. And so their adventure continued, with new abilities, new challenges, and a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were confident in their strength and unity. For they knew that as long as they had each other, they could overcome anything. And with that knowledge, they pressed forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead and bring light back to their world. Chapter 9: The Trial of Strength. The dense forest enveloped the heroes as they continued their journey, empowered with new abilities and determination. The sun, breaking through the thick canopy of trees, cast intricate shadows on the ground. The travelers moved forward, wary of sudden attacks and magical traps. Their first landmark on the path to their goal was a dried-up fountain in the heart of the forest. The fountain looked ancient and abandoned, its stone statues covered in moss, and in the center was a deep basin that had once been filled with crystal-clear water. Looking at this place, they felt that the fountain was connected to some ancient magic. "This place seems so grim and empty," Sarah noted, running her hand over the stone. "It's like it was once a paradise, but now it's all desolate." "Maybe we can bring it back to life," Tom said thoughtfully, surveying the surrounding trees and bushes. "But first, we need to understand what happened here and how to fix it." Suddenly, the forest silence was broken by a rustle. Shadows emerged from the darkness, surrounding the heroes on all sides. The shadows were indistinct and shapeless, but their presence felt ominous and threatening. "Be ready," Julia whispered, extending her hands forward and summoning the power of nature now at her command. Branches and roots began to move under her direction, creating barriers and traps for the shadows. Tom conjured a magical barrier, protecting them from attacks, his hands glowing with energy as he formed an invisible shield. Sarah, concentrating, tried to predict the enemy's moves to warn her friends of impending dangers. The shadows attacked, their movements chaotic and unpredictable. Julia controlled the plants, directing them at the enemies, binding and restraining them. Tom strengthened the barriers, repelling attacks and creating temporary shelters. Sarah, trusting her intuition, pointed out where the next assault would come from. "These creatures won't give up," Sarah shouted as one of the shadows broke through the barrier and tried to attack her. "We'll handle it," Tom responded, reinforcing the defense. "Stick together and we'll defeat them." The battle became more intense. The shadows proved to be persistent and malevolent, but the heroes stood firm, using their new powers. Their unity and synergy became the key to victory. Suddenly, a more menacing figure appeared from the shadows, a lesser demon. It was small in stature, its body covered in scales and sores oozing greenish fluid. Its eyes glowed with malice and cunning, and its long claws seemed ready to tear through any barrier. "This is something new," Tom muttered, preparing for the new threat. "Be careful, it might be more dangerous than it looks." The demon roared and charged at the heroes. It moved with frightening speed, its claws leaving deep scratches on Tom's magical barriers. Julia directed roots and vines at the demon, trying to stop it, but it easily tore them apart, continuing its attack. "We need to find its weakness," Sarah yelled, dodging a strike. "Stay together and protect each other." Tom strengthened the defense, creating more powerful barriers and traps. Julia, feeling the power of nature, directed her efforts to create giant tree trunks meant to crush the demon. Sarah, focusing on her intuition, tried to understand how to defeat this creature. The demon was clever and brutal. It used its claws and teeth, attacking unexpectedly, trying to disperse the heroes. But despite this, their unity and strength of spirit helped them hold together. At one point, Julia noticed that the demon avoided the light emanating from the magical crystals adorning the cave walls. She realized that light might be the key to victory. Light. It fears the light, she shouted, directing her powers to illuminate the cave. Tom and Sarah understood her plan and began directing magical beams at the demon. Under the light of the crystals, the demon started to weaken, its movements becoming slower and less accurate. "Keep going," Julia encouraged, directing more light at the enemy. "We can defeat it." Under the combined efforts of the heroes, the demon began to retreat, its malevolent eyes glaring with hatred, but its strength was waning. With a final effort, combining all their powers, Tom, Julia, and Sarah directed a powerful beam of light straight at the demon's heart. With a ghastly scream, the demon dissolved into the air, leaving only a mist and a foul odor behind. The cave filled with silence, broken only by their labored breathing. "We did it," Sarah said with relief, lowering her hands. "But what was that?" "I think it was one of the guardians we need to defeat," Tom replied, surveying the battle scene. "But we need to find the others." Suddenly, Eshin appeared, their new friend and ally, who had been following them. His eyes shone with determination and excitement. "I'm glad I arrived in time. It seems you handled the first guardian," he said, looking at the remnants of the battle. "But be careful, the next trials will be even harder." Suddenly, the cave began to change. The darkness started to dissipate, and where the battle had taken place, green shoots began to appear. Vegetation grew at an incredible speed, transforming the cave into a paradise. The dried-up fountain began to splash with water, its streams crystal clear and sparkling in the sunlight. "This is incredible," Julia whispered, watching the transformation. "It's like nature itself is thanking us." Above the fountain, a tablet appeared, hanging in the air. The heroes approached, and Tom cautiously took it in his hands. The tablet was covered in ancient runes, which began to glow at their touch. "What is this?" Sarah asked, examining the inscriptions. "It's a message," Tom said, reading the runes. "It talks about a hidden portal to the shadow world. To open it, we need to defeat 3 guardians of the lesser evil. We've already defeated one. So we need to find the others," Julia concluded, feeling a surge of new strength and confidence. "We're on the right track." Eshin, holding an ancient scroll, added, "This scroll might help us. It describes ancient spells and rituals that could be useful on our journey." The heroes once again examined the renewed cave, filled with life and light. The fountain now splashed, its water seeming magical and revitalizing. They knew that many trials still awaited them, but now they had hope and confidence in their own abilities. "We must continue our journey," Tom said, hiding the tablet in his backpack, "and find the remaining guardians." The heroes left the cave, filled with strength and determination. They knew that new trials awaited them, but now they were ready for them, possessing new abilities and a unity that helped them overcome all obstacles. After defeating the shadow and the demon, the friends left the garden and ventured into the forest. Evening fell, and they lit a fire, preparing to camp for the night. Ashen, their new companion, began to tell his story. "My village was destroyed by shadows," he began. "We lived peacefully, but one night turned into a nightmare. I was a child when I saw the shadows take over our home. My parents tried to protect me but were killed before my eyes." Ashen paused, his eyes darkened by the memories. "I was saved by a sage who took me under his wing. He taught me magic and the art of fighting shadows. We traveled across many lands, studying ancient texts and gathering knowledge. The sage told me that the shadows seek to consume all light in our world, turning it as dark as their own." "That's horrible," Julia said. "But how did you survive?" "The sage taught me to control the power of light," Ashen continued. "He knew that one day I would meet people who would help me in the fight against the shadows. He believed in a prophecy that a group of chosen ones would stop the darkness. And now I understand that it's you. Sarah, Tom, and Julia exchanged glances, feeling the weight and responsibility, but also confidence in their abilities. We won't stop until we destroy the shadows and free our world, Tom declared. Ashen nodded, satisfied with their determination. For this, we need to find and destroy the remaining 2 guardians. One has already been defeated, but greater trials await us. How will we know where to find these guardians? Sarah asked. We must follow the magical signs, Ashen explained. In each place where the guardians hide, there are certain signs. The sage left me a map that will show us the way. They discussed their plan of action, trying to account for all possible difficulties and dangers. From time to time, Ashen shared his knowledge about the shadows and their weaknesses. We need to be ready for anything, he warned. The shadows are cunning and devious, but we have the power of light and our resolve. When the discussion ended, the friends began to prepare for rest. Night fell over the forest, and the fire illuminated their tired but determined faces. Good night, Ashen said, lying down next to his friends. Tomorrow brings a new day and new trials. Tom, Julia, and Sarah lay down to sleep, knowing that many challenges still lay ahead. But now they were confident that together they could overcome any obstacles. Waking up in the morning, the group continued on their journey. Hours passed when Ashen suddenly stopped, raising his hand to warn them. He looked into the depths of the forest, and his face turned as pale as chalk. Something's wrong, he whispered. What do you see? Julia asked, feeling her heart start to race. Shadows, they're here. Suddenly the forest fell silent. Even the wind stopped rustling the leaves. Darkness thickened around them, as if consuming everything. We must be ready, Tom said, drawing his weapon. But before anyone could react, Ashen began to change. His eyes filled with blackness, and his face twisted in pain. Dark lines started to appear on his skin like tree roots. What's happening to him? Sarah screamed, backing away. Ashen let out an inhuman scream, and darkness began to swirl around him. He started to slowly rise into the air, surrounded by a black aura. He's possessed, Tom said, gripping his weapon tighter. We have to do something. Ashen looked at his former friends with a devilish grin. His voice changed, becoming hollow and menacing. You will all die, he hissed, waving his hand. Dark tendrils shot from his fingers, aimed at Tom and Julia. Tom managed to dodge, but one of the tendrils struck his shoulder, making him cry out in pain. Julia raised her hands, trying to shield herself with a magical barrier, but the tendrils shattered it like glass. We have to stop him, she shouted. Sarah, gathering her courage, directed a stream of light at Ashen, trying to dispel the darkness surrounding him. But the power of the shadows was too great. Ashen laughed, his eyes gleaming with malice. You cannot defeat me, he yelled, directing the darkness at his friends. Despite the pain, Tom rose and charged at Ashen with his sword, but Ashen deftly dodged and struck him with dark energy. Tom was thrown several meters, crashing into a tree. Tom, Julia screamed, rushing to him. Taking advantage of the moment, Ashen directed his power at Sarah. She tried to defend herself, but the darkness surrounded her, squeezing like a vice. She screamed, feeling her strength leave her. No, Julia raised her hand, and an aura of light glowed around her. She directed all her power at Ashen, trying to break the darkness. Ashen howled in pain, his face contorted. For a moment, the light broke through the darkness, and the friends saw a glimpse of Ashen's human face, suffering and pleading for help. Julia, help me, he whispered, but the darkness regained control. At that moment, the darkness thickened around Ashen, and he, letting out one last wail, vanished in a whirlwind of shadows, leaving only a dark mark on the ground. He escaped, Sarah whispered, falling to her knees. We lost him. The friends stood in horror, realizing that their new ally had become their sworn enemy. They understood that the fight against the shadows would become even more fierce, and now they had to find Ashen and try to save him from possession. When night fell again on the forest, the friends lit a fire and sat around it, pondering what had happened. They knew that even greater trials awaited them, and now they needed to be even more vigilant and prepared for any surprises. "We can't leave him like that," Tom said, clenching his fists. "We have to find a way to save Ashen." "We will find him," Julia replied, determination shining in her eyes, "and we will free him from the darkness, no matter the cost." Sarah silently nodded, understanding that their journey would become even more dangerous and unpredictable. But they had a goal, and they were ready to fight to the end. Chapter 10: The Search for the Second Guardian. After the events with Ashley, the group realized they needed to find and defeat the remaining guardians as quickly as possible. In the morning, they packed their belongings and set off, following the magical signs on the map that Ashley had given them. The puppy that Julia had found in the cave ran alongside them, curiously looking around. His unusual appearance, snow-white fur and glowing blue eyes, instilled hope and faith in the friends that he would become their protector. They walked for a long time, making their way through the dense forest. With each hour, it became increasingly evident that they were approaching the place where the second guardian was hiding. Soon the forest cleared, revealing an old cemetery. The abandoned and moss-covered gravestones created a gloomy atmosphere. "It looks like we're here," said Tom, carefully surveying the surroundings. "Be ready," warned Julia. "Something's definitely not right here." The puppy growled, sensing something amiss. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. From under the graves, the dead, reanimated by some dark force, started to rise. They emerged from their graves with the terrible creak of bones and decaying tissues, heading toward the friends. "Prepare for battle," Tom shouted, drawing his sword. Julia created a protective barrier around herself, while Sarah prepared her magical arrows. The first blow fell on Tom. One of the undead lunged at him, but Tom easily deflected the attack, decapitating the enemy. However, there were too many of them. "This is just impossible," exclaimed Sarah, fending off the undead. At that moment, a giant worm emerged from the ground, winding around the gravestones. Its body was covered in spikes, and its mouth, full of sharp teeth, emitted a foul stench. The worm stared at the friends with its empty eyes. "What kind of monster is this?" cried Julia. The grave worm began to attack, releasing balls of poisonous slime from its mouth. The friends tried to dodge, but the poisonous slime was everywhere. Julia, gathering all her magical strength, directed a powerful stream of light at the worm, blinding it momentarily. Meanwhile, Tom and Sarah fought off the reanimated dead, making their way to the worm. "We need to figure out how to defeat it," Tom shouted, swinging his sword. Despite its temporary blindness, the worm furiously lunged at the friends, opening its mouth wide. Each of its strikes against the ground was like a hammer blow, scattering earth and stones in all directions. "Stay together," shouted Sarah, shooting down the undead one arrow after another. Tom, seeing an opportunity, rushed forward, jumping over the heads of the undead. He moved confidently toward the worm, but the dead blocked his path. With one powerful swing of his sword, he cleared his way, finding himself right in front of the monster. The worm turned to Tom and released a stream of poisonous slime at him. Tom barely managed to dodge, but a few drops still hit his skin, causing terrible pain. Clenching his teeth, he headed straight for the worm, trying to ignore the pain. "I found its weak spot," Sarah shouted. "On the belly, in the center, there's a glowing stone." Seeing the stone, Tom realized this was their chance. He leaped onto the worm, aiming for the stone. But the worm, sensing danger, began to writhe and strike Tom with its spikes. Julia, seeing that Tom needed help, focused all her magical power and directed it at the worm. The magical light blinded the monster, giving Tom a chance to deliver the decisive blow. He plunged his sword straight into the stone, and the worm let out a deafening roar, shattering into pieces. With the worm's defeat, all the undead collapsed to the ground, turning to dust. Breathing heavily, Tom approached the spot where the stone lay. He picked it up and felt a warm energy spread through his body. The stone began to glow, and from its light, a mysterious sword formed. "What is this?" asked Julia, coming closer. "This isn't just a sword," Tom replied. "When I held it, I saw a vision. This sword belonged to a great warrior who fought against dark forces. Now it belongs to me. Feeling the warm energy fill his body, Tom suddenly plunged into another vision. He found himself on a battlefield, surrounded by the dead and demons. A fierce battle was raging around him. He held this very sword, which glowed with a bright light, dispelling the darkness. Before him stood a great warrior in armor covered with runes. He was majestic and powerful. "You are the chosen one," said the warrior, his voice echoing across the field. "This sword is the key to defeating the darkness. You must use it wisely." Tom felt the power of the sword fill him. He swung it, and the light emanating from the blade destroyed all the enemies around. Then the vision began to fade, and he found himself back in the cemetery, holding the sword. "I saw all of this," Tom said, breathing heavily. "This sword belonged to a great warrior, and now it's mine. We need to use it to defeat the darkness." Exchanging glances, the friends realized they had found the key to the mystery and that many more trials awaited them ahead. They decided to rest, regain their strength, and prepare to search for the last guardian. At dawn, the three friends and their loyal puppy continued on their journey. The forest, which had recently been dark and ominous, now blossomed, filled with life. Rare animals such as deer, hares, and foxes flitted about, creating a sense of restored harmony in nature. The puppy joyfully ran around, playing with the small forest creatures. He chased after foxes until he disappeared from sight. After a while, the friends noticed his absence and began calling and searching for him, but to no avail. "Where could he be?" asked Julia anxiously, looking around. "I hope he finds his way back," said Tom, trying to reassure her. With heavy hearts, but full of determination, the friends continued their journey, discussing Tom's vision of the ancient warrior. Who could he have been, pondered Sarah, and what role did he play in this ancient world? "Perhaps he was a protector," suggested Tom. "His spirit continues to guard the sword and those who wield it." After a long journey, they reached a small hewn rock with a waterfall. Water cascaded down from a height, creating a melodious sound that both calmed and inspired them. "This must be the place," said Tom, checking the map. The waterfall, the rock, everything matches. They began to examine the rock and the waterfall, careful not to miss any details. The riddle was complex. Numerous ancient symbols and runes covered the rock, forming intricate patterns. "There must be a key to solving this," said Tom, studying the runes. After much deliberation and discussion, they finally understood that the runes indicated a specific sequence of actions. Julia, using her magical energy, activated the necessary symbols, and the rock behind the waterfall began to part, revealing a passage. Entering inside, they found themselves in dark corridors designed in the Scandinavian style. The stone walls were adorned with carvings of ancient warriors and gods. The atmosphere was oppressive and mysterious. "This place feels so ancient," whispered Julia. "It's filled with true history." Surprisingly, there were neither shadows nor enemies. They cautiously moved through the corridors, enjoying the silence and beauty of their surroundings. Soon, they encountered another danger: fire traps that appeared along their path. "Watch out," shouted Tom, dodging a sudden burst of flames. One of the traps injured Sarah, burning her arm. She cried out in pain, but, gritting her teeth, continued on. "We must be extremely careful," said Tom, helping Sarah treat her wound. Moving forward, they reached a vast hall with carved stones. Ancient inscriptions and images telling the story of this place covered the walls. "This is an ancient Norse barrow," said Sarah, studying the inscriptions. "The greatest Norse warriors are buried here. According to legend, they were cursed by Odin himself, and their restless bodies are doomed to eternal torment." "What are draugrs?" asked Tom. "Draugrs are sinister creatures risen from the grave," explained Sarah. "They are strong and dangerous. In ancient times, they were feared and respected for their power and knowledge of magic." The friends began searching for clues to proceed further. They examined every wall, every corner, until they came across a circle with carved symbols etched into one of the walls. "It looks like an amulet," said Tom. "It might be the key. But where can we find it?" They stood in confusion. unsure of what to do next. The riddle was complex, and they needed to find a way to unlock the hidden passage. Part I solving the ancient puzzle. We need to examine every detail, suggested Julia. We might have missed something. They began meticulously searching the room, carefully studying every detail. Suddenly, Tom's eyes fell on a small niche hidden behind a dust-covered statue in the corner of the hall. He moved closer and examined it more carefully. The niche was deeper than it initially seemed, and something metallic glinted in its depths. "There's something here," he exclaimed, pulling out an ancient sword with an ornate hilt. The sword slowly slid out of its sheath, emitting a soft glow. Runes etched on the blade seemed to come alive under the torchlight. "This must be what we need," said Sarah, amazed at the weapon. "Perhaps this sword will open the way for us." They returned to the sarcophagus, and Tom inserted the sword into a special slot they noticed on its side. The sarcophagus trembled once more and began to open, surrounded by a tense silence. Inside the sarcophagus lay something wrapped in an ancient cloak. Carefully lifting the cloak, the friends discovered an ancient amulet adorned with runic symbols and precious stones. "This is the last key," said Tom, lifting the amulet. "Now we can open all the doors." They exited the hall, heading towards the next passage. This time, the amulet fit perfectly into the ancient lock on a massive door, which slowly opened, letting them into an even darker and more ominous corridor. Part IV, the Last Guardian. The corridor was long and winding, and each step echoed loudly. The walls were covered in ancient symbols and depictions of battles that seemed to come to life in the torchlight. The friends felt a growing tension and anxiety. "We must be prepared for anything," warned Tom. "We don't know what lies ahead." Soon, they reached a vast hall adorned with majestic statues of ancient warriors. In the center of the hall stood a massive throne, surrounded by a mysterious light. Seated on the throne was a figure in majestic armor. "This must be the Last Guardian," said Tom, slowly approaching the throne. The figure rose, revealing an ancient warrior with eyes that radiated wisdom and power. He looked at Tom and spoke. "Who are you to dare disturb the peace of this place?" "I am Tom," replied Tom, meeting the gaze. "We have come to end the curse and free your people." The warrior carefully examined Tom, then looked at his sword and nodded. "You are indeed worthy. This sword is the key to our freedom. But to free us, you must pass the final trial." The warrior raised his hand, and a massive magical barrier appeared before them. "This barrier protects us from the curse. You must destroy it using the power of the sword and your determination." Tom, Julia, and Sarah prepared for the final trial. Tom raised the sword, and its light began to pierce the magical barrier. Julia and Sarah supported him with their magical energy, directing it into the sword. The barrier began to crack and crumble, and with each moment, the light grew brighter. Finally, the barrier disintegrated into dust, and the hall filled with light and warmth. The warrior approached Tom, placed his hand on his shoulder, and said, "You have freed us. Now we can find peace. Thank you and your friends." With these words, the figure of the warrior and all the ancient statues began to disappear, turning into light. Tom, Julia, and Sarah stood in the center of the hall, realizing they had completed their great journey and freed the ancient people from the curse. "We did it," said Julia, hugging Tom and Sarah. "Yes, and now we can return home, knowing we accomplished something great," replied Tom, smiling. They left the ancient barrow, feeling relief and joy. The puppy, as if by a miracle, returned to them, wagging its tail happily. "Everything ended well," said Sarah, petting the puppy. "Now we can return home and start a new life." Their journey led them back to the village, where they were welcomed with joy and gratitude. They became heroes, and their story would be told for many generations. But for Tom, Julia, and Sarah, it was not just an adventure. It was proof that friendship, courage, and determination could overcome any obstacles and change the world for the better. Part V returned to the village. After finishing their great adventure, The friends returned to the village, which now greeted them with joy and gratitude. The villagers welcomed them as heroes, and their story quickly spread throughout the area. "We did it," said Tom, smiling. "Now we can rest and enjoy a peaceful life." "Yes, but we will always remember this adventure," added Julia. "It changed us and showed what we are capable of." Sarah, looking at the rising sun, said, "We went through a lot, but it was worth it. Now we know that friendship and determination can overcome any obstacles." In the evening, the village held a celebration in honor of the returning heroes. The villagers prepared delicious dishes, played music, and danced. Tom, Julia, and Sarah enjoyed the evening, knowing their adventure had finally ended. The puppy, happily running among the children, was glad to be back with his friends. The village regained its peace and joy thanks to their bravery and determination. "We did it together," said Tom, raising a toast to his friends. "To us and the future we can now build." "To us," exclaimed Julia and Sarah, raising their glasses. The celebration continued late into the night, and each of them knew that their adventure was only the beginning of their great journey. Ahead of them awaited a new life, full of joy, friendship, and new opportunities.